he saw the guy running through a window and knew that he would, as the guy on the inside of a compound ran past a window, he realized that he'd be running through a door. And he saw the exposed door and drew on it and waited and dropped him as he passed the door and got him in the head about 40, 50 meters. I didn't give him props a whole lot because we're brothers, but I was like, holy, that's a hell of a shot for a heavy.
Welcome to Combat Story. I'm Ryan Fugit, and I served Warzone tours as an Army attack helicopter pilot and CIA officer over a 15-year career. I'm fascinated by the experiences of the elite in combat. On this show, I interview some of the best to understand what combat felt like on their front lines. This is Combat Story. Today we hear a heartbreaking yet inspiring set of combat stories of three brothers, as told by the only one to survive the post-9/11 battlefield, former Marine Beau Wise. While serving in Afghanistan, his brother, SEAL veteran and CIA contractor Jeremy Wise was killed in an al-Qaeda suicide bombing that devastated the U.S. intel community, as you'll hear in this interview. Less than 3 years later, his other brother, Green Beret Ben Wise, was fatally wounded after volunteering for a dangerous assignment during a firefight with the Taliban. Ben was posthumously awarded the Silver Star, while Jeremy received the Intelligence Star and a star on the CIA's Memorial Wall, which I can attest to. Our guest, Beau, is the only known American service member to be pulled from the battlefield after losing two brothers in Afghanistan. This was a challenging interview, but one that I'm eternally grateful that I was allowed to do. The account you're about to hear is detailed in the incredible book, Threewisemen, written by Beau Wise and Tom Cilio. Enjoy. Beau, thanks for taking the time to share your story today.
Hey, Ryan, thanks for having me on, brother. An honor.
So this is probably going to be the hardest one I've ever done. I am one of four boys. I'm the youngest, like yourself. I have three sons myself, so reading through your book was very challenging. Well written, great, just such a well done piece. But it was very hard to read as a brother and as a father. So thank you very much for taking the time to do that, to put everything you did into the book and represent Jeremy and Ben the way you have.
I can't take full credit. I can't take a whole lot of credit, honestly. Thanks to Tom for putting it all together. I'm an amazing co-author. I wouldn't change it for the world.
Yeah. So I wanted to start out with just one quote from the book, something you bring up, and I circled it as I was reading. I was like, well, this is interesting. And it was talking about your mom, who was first of all, I think a mother of three sons just in general has a special place in heaven, especially after what has happened. But it said, my mom was a walking encyclopedia of American conflicts.
Yeah.
Where did that come from? What was that all about?
You know, her dad was it was an Air Force. It was Army Air Corps, as it was during World War II, and he was a World War II veteran, and he was a history buff. My father's dad was an American history PhD, and so I don't know, it was just kind of something that we grew up with in our family. But the Civil War in particular, she had the bio on every single general, you know, from Stonewall to Sherman. She knew it all. But so that was just kind of what we grew up with, you know. That era, if anything came up in history, you know, math or science, you go to my dad. History, you go to my mom. But
and would she just kind of sit there at night and talk, like at the dinner table, she just talk about some of these folks?
Yeah, I mean, you know, here and there. I mean, I don't even remember how it came up, you know, but it just, you know, the most random of places. That was something that she was enthusiast about. But Civil War to World War II, not so much World War I, which is ironic because our Marine legacy started in World War I, and you know, with one of the doughboys, Marine doughboys. But yeah, it would come up in the odd places, but typically, you know, 9 out of 10 categories. My dad was a surgeon, so we would go to him for a lot of things, you know, whenever homework came around. But history, we always went to mom.
That's very cool. All right. So I'd like to, because Ben and Jeremy are such big components, obviously, of the book and your life. And as we talk more, we'll get into more about them. I'd like to take a minute just to have you share a bit more about them now, maybe as kids, like your personality traits. The way you describe it in the book is funny because my boys they actually fall into the same type of personalities. So yeah. I'd love to just hear you kind of describe, as you were younger, the age gap, and then what each of you was like in turn.
So Jeremy, the firstborn, my dad was an intern or a resident, I think, at the Los Angeles VA. And that's when Jeremy was born. Shortly thereafter, they moved back to Arkansas, which is where the family roots. My granddad was a Razorback. And so Jeremy was 10 years older than myself, Ben 7, and Heather 4, I believe. Jeremy, the classic A-type personality, very demonstrative, used his hands a lot, like Talladega Nights, like, I don't know what to do with my hands. And he's very, he had two senses of humor. Very dry when he was being sarcastic and you didn't realize that he was taking a stab at you. And then when he wanted like the whole crowd, he was very animated like Chris Farley. So Ben was dry 90% of his delivery, a little bit more quiet, a little bit more middle child introvert. Heather, more like Jeremy, and me, I'm kind of a violent clash of all three of them, I think. That'd be a good way to put it, I suppose.
Got it. Who is kind of like the rule breaker and the rule follower?
Ben was the more conventional rule follower, fall in line. Jeremy was definitely the rule breaker. When I was a kid, we stole a big construction. It's like a sawhorse, but a road closed. We went to this private school, and there was one drive in and one drive out. And Jeremy put this road closed sign in front of the school shortly before graduation, so kids couldn't get to school. That was very the typical shenanigans of Jeremy growing up, and climbing out on the roof whenever the teacher left. She would climb out the window to go get a football or something like that. And they playing football in class when the teacher wasn't there. Like, we always heard stories of Jeremy shenanigans.
If you had to pinpoint the time where you and your brothers, either all three of you or two of you, got in the most trouble as kids, what would that moment be?
Well, it's a short window just because of the age gap. Right? Yeah. I was in, I guess, first grade when Jeremy left for West Point. So, I guess when I was like about 5 or 6, but there was a couple windows where they were both living together, or all three of them were actually living together in Little Rock and in Pensacola, Florida. So when we would go out to visit, we would have like a week to get as much trouble accomplished as we could. But early on, with his friends and high school friends who he would drag along and he would convince them into, multiple different things. But I was, because he never felt threatened by me. So I was kind of like a pet. I got taken everywhere. And so I got to participate in a lot of stuff, or at least observe, which usually got him in trouble if I was there. But
what about with Ben? Because you guys were close, still a 7-year age gap, right? But a little bit closer in age. Any dangerous antics or serious troublemaking amongst the two of you?
Not so much with Ben. Ben is kind of, he had a wild sense of humor, but he was pretty mild in his personality. He was never a loud guy. And, whenever the crowd roared, he would just kind of sit back in the corner. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So, with Ben, we were close enough in size because he was a little guy. He was, 5'6", 5'7", somewhere around there. And as I started to hit the same kind of growth spurt that Jeremy had, that Ben never had, all of a sudden me and Ben were rivals, and we with Ben, things, little ticks would get physical more often than they did with Jeremy. But
when did that end for you guys? Because I think there's a point in time where brothers are just constantly at each other, and then at some point it's like, all right, we gotta move on here.
There was a moment. It's in the book, and it's one of the most that shaped Ben and myself more than anything else as far as altercations between any of us, where Ben and I got pretty physical, and he threw me into an arm wall, and the mirror that I got thrown into was like this oval shape suspended in the door of this arm wall thing, and it came loose, and I think we rigged it so that my mom didn't know, at least until Jeremy was out of the house. But anyway, the fight got pretty bad, as brothers do. So it's just going to happen. And Jeremy was all about it when we were just roughhousing. He was just kind of like sitting there on the bed, like, And then once he realized that it was kind of going to the next pitch, he stepped in and he removed Ben from the room pretty quickly and pretty forcefully. And then afterwards, Ben came back. To this day, I have no idea what he told me. But he came back and he was, talking to me, and he said, and he had his arm around both of us, and he said, look, when we're old, we're fat, we're bald, our wives might leave us, we might be bankrupt, or our business might go under, whatever it is, we're always going to have brothers. We're always going to have each other. This is the one thing that we have to protect, from here until we leave this earth. So that was kind of a shaping moment, and I noticed a difference in Ben after that. Ben treated me a little bit differently, like, a little bit more responsibly, like, I need to protect this relationship or nurture a relationship. We didn't really have one at that point, and I would say that would be the defining moment.
I will say, I was hoping you were going to say that. That was one section. I just wanted to read it because it was really powerful for me. Where he says, someday, this is Jeremy speaking, someday we'll be old. We might also be fat, bald, and broke. Maybe our wives will leave us and we'll have absolutely nothing left in the world. But even then, we'll be lucky. And you know why? We'll always have each other. No matter what happens, you always have two brothers to lean on. Man, I can barely say that without crying right now. God, it's heartbreaking. So let's then help me understand how the three of you picked different branches of service, right? So we got Jeremy, who goes into tries the Army. It's not right. Goes back to medical school. And then then he just decides, look, I'm going to be a SEAL. Ben is just an ODA SF door kicker. And then you decide to go to the Marines. So if you could kind of break them down one by one, like what made you each move to those areas? I'd love to hear it.
So with Jeremy, it was very, very deliberate, very specific. He would not accept anything other than buds. Matter of fact, when he got rolled back, he was offered, I haven't talked about this in years. It was something like kind of cool, like training dolphins for the EOD guys or something like that. You know what I mean? He got injured 242, and he pounded every door he could, to include Congressman Zinke, or it wasn't Congressman, of course, he was the Buds commander. And he eventually worked his way to Zinke's door, and I was like, please, it is Buds or bust. I have got to be a team guy. But in that transition, he was offered, all right, you did good, got injured, whatever. And he was like, no, I'm not taking this job. I don't want any of the job. Then Buds. And that was the mentality that got him a second shot and rolled him back to 244. So that kind of gives you an idea of where Jeremy was. There was nothing else other than the teams, than SEAL teams. For Ben, I don't think it was so much deliberate. I think it wasn't so much like the job or the MOS per se. I think as he just wanted to serve and he wanted to be in combat arms. So infantry based, whatever. And he wasn't, and he would have been the first to tell you years later that, looking back, he wasn't prepared. He didn't do it deliberately, like he should, like Jeremy said in the book. But it kind of helped Ben grow up. I mean, he went airborne infantry, and he ended up not making Ranger selection early on back in 99 or early 2000. And that was one of those, oh man, I screwed up. I should have done this. And So later on, he went with 2nd Infantry Division. He took a step up and went to a scout sniper unit. And he just, kept making himself better. When he got back, he just decided on, in the broad scope, having been exposed and done a 13-month deployment, looking back, he was like, okay, now I know what I want to do and where I want to go, and I'm going to make a plan and I'm going to get there. And SF selection was it for him. And he, always said that he thought that later on, he said that he thought that the Green Berets were, they have a little bit more maturity to them. The culture is, it's not as strenuous as it used to be, but you have to be an E6 or higher, or E5 waiverable, I think, to get in. So most of those guys are combat proven, and it was just a community that appealed to him. And then myself, I heard growing up, I heard stories about college and the military. I was never envious of them when they talked about college. And the more and more they talked about, their job on a daily basis, the more it appealed to me. And I was kind of torn, Army, Navy, Marine Corps, the Marine Corps heritage, which was always a big part of our childhood growing up. And then, a young Navy SEAL and a combat proven Green Beret. So I had a lot of different perspectives. And, at the end of it, sitting down or talking with both of them and then saying, what is it that you want to do specifically? Like, don't tell me what uniform you want to wear. What job do you want to do? I was like, well, I love guns, and I love shooting. They were like, you don't have to jump out of planes to kick down doors and shoot people in the face, dude. And I was like, okay, well, and eventually we settled on Marine Infantry, and I was kind of unsure of it, I think the first couple of years, but as I approached re-enlistment, I was like, I saw recon up close and, all the other different facets in the Marine Corps, but I finally picked a 20-year goal, and it was being a Marine gunner. That was where I wanted to go. I wanted to be a warrant officer of infantrymen, kind of like the great librarians of the Marine Corps. And after those 4 years in the Marine Corps, that was my long-term plan. So we didn't plan it that way, long story short, but just how it worked out.
And if I recall correctly from the book, you've got Jeremy is actually second into the military. I mean, he goes to West Point first, but Ben is really the first one in. So you kind of have the middle brother who gets in first. Jeremy is pissed, right, that Ben is going in. He hasn't thought it through, right? Jeremy's had like this plan in place for a long time, or at least he believes he has. But then I found it odd because I think the same thing happened to you when they come to you and you're like, I'm going in the Marines, and Ben is getting on your case, right?
Yeah. Yeah. One of the reasons I think that they were both upset is that I never finished college. They have a bachelor's, and that was like the sermon that my dad had, from the get-go. Like, look, if you want to go to the military, I support it. I will support it, but have options, get a degree, and then, go from there. And, that way, I mean, you have the option of being an Apache pilot or a grunt or whatever else, and, you can figure out whatever you want. And I'll tell you the truth, I'm going to give the exact same advice to my kids if they ever say the same thing about military, just degree first. That's it. I'm serious. That's what it's going to be in my house.
That's great. All right. I got to ask this because some of the other folks I've interviewed have had similar stories, and the comments we get back from people are like, they remember this happening to them. Can you please talk through how your mom reacted when you came back after signing up for the Marine Corps?
She wouldn't talk to me. She wouldn't feed me. She refused to cook. And I'm serious. Like it was a bluff. It was a bluff, and it lasted like a week. And I stayed at my buddy's house so I could eat. and she eventually called and she apologized. She was like, "Come home." She was like, "I'm still mad at you, but come home." And so, life returned to normal. I think, as proud as my dad was, he shared the frustration. Like I remember, and he, Southern Baptist deacon, he did not swear ever. And I remember him saying, like, I will have one doctor, damn it. And, Jeremy leaving medical school, Ben, going on a natural science degree. And then and I didn't finish my basics. I think they were kind of, but it's just
was he looking to Heather for that, the doctor in the family?
No, I think Heather was dead set. She was in a Bible school, and we were all very proud of her, and he didn't want her to deter from that. That was like her calling was, being a Christian family. You have a kid in the ministry, you don't deter them from it. But
man, that's funny. Okay, great. If we could then, Beau, could we jump into I want to get the timing right, because I think it's really important for this story. By the time you're in the Marine Corps, where are Jeremy and Ben in their military lives at the time? Like, if you could, and sorry to put you on the spot here, but if you could, what year is it as you join up, and where is Jeremy and his work, and where is Ben at that point?
So Jeremy is, so I enlisted in, September 2008. And Jeremy had left the SEAL teams in August of 2008. And that's when he went through Z and GRS or whatever it was at the time, and was picked up by the Central Intelligence Agency. So he was on his way, as far as, getting trained up with his team to deploy to Khost province. And Ben would have been in Afghanistan. His ODA was already, in theater, and Luke, his son was born, so he was on paternity leave in Fort Lewis. So he was back home for a couple weeks, and if Luke hadn't been born, Jeremy and Ben and I would have all been downrange in Afghanistan, roughly about 3 weeks apart from insertions, in between insertion. So.
Wow. All right. So with that in mind, let's jump in to your experience in combat to begin, and then we'll jump to maybe a more difficult one for you, and then we'll talk about Ben and Jeremy, if that's okay. I'm going to ask something. I know I'm going to get this wrong, and I'm probably going to take a lot of heat for it later. So you've touched on it already. But the MOSs I'm used to are Army MOSs. So do you say, is it a 0331, or is there a different way of saying it?
Everybody says 0331, but it is a 0, actually. Yeah.
Okay. 0331, right? So what is that, what did that mean to you? Because you talked about it a little bit earlier, but that was your role. What did that mean to you, and what was kind of your responsibility going into your first deployment?
So I was... 03 means in the Marine Corps is the code for infantry, and the specialty MOS, 11 is rifleman, 21 is recon, 31 machine gunner, et cetera, mortarman, and all that. I was a machine gunner, and machine gunners in the infantry are kind of, I would say, jack of all trades. They can, work in any facet of the infantry, in a line company or weapons company or whatever. I was part of an anti-armor team, and I was placed in the lead the lead vehicle for the first section of our platoon, Cat 2-1, 1st Battalion, 3rd Marines. So whenever we had mounted ops, I was in the front turret. Whenever we were on the ground, I was either the SAW, which is the Squad Automatic Weapon 5.56, or the 240 on patrol. We rotate. There's, in a weapons platoon like that, there's a lot of 31s available, so anybody can carry, one of the big guns, if I want to pass it off to somebody. Is there any rivalry between the 1-1s, the 2-1s, the 3-1s, or any? The rivalries are in your regiment. So if you're 1st Battalion, 3rd Marine Regiment, the rivalry is going to be 2-3 or 3-3. Got it. And your sister battalions, and because they most often exchange AOs. And if the left seat, right seat comes with one of your brother battalions or sister battalions or whatever. So the question is, who does better with the AO than the other battalion? So that would be our rivalry.
Awesome. All right. So take us, if you can, to your first deployment, right? So you're all trained up, you're ready to go, you deploy. Where are you deploying to? What year is it? And what is your role in that?
So 1st Battalion, 3rd Marines was part of the, I believe it was OEF 1 or 2, maybe 2. We were there for a couple or 2 or 3 different phases, I think, or 2. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So we deployed late 2009, and we were there until spring of 2010. We were part of the invasion of Marjah. Marjah was a big Taliban stronghold in Helmand province. If Afghanistan is, it's about the southernmost point in Afghanistan. The southeast is Kandahar, and Helmand, Farah, and something else. But so not too far from the Pakistani border. The Pashtuns reign Helmand. It's a Pashtun-controlled territory, so Pashtun-Wali is the code, the culture, the climate. Very, very conservative, primitive lifestyle by modern standards. In Marjah was becoming a stronghold. We were part of the team that was going to be the picket line for the invasion on the east side of the city. Just west of us was 1st Battalion 6 Marines and 3rd Battalion 6 Marines. And they were, I believe, the spearhead for the invasion for the most part, particularly 3-6, I think. They were dropped into the middle of the city. And it was a pretty kinetic AO for some places, being part of an anti-armor team. Whenever we were mounted, the fight tended to run away. Taliban knows what heavy machine guns are, Mark 19s, which is fully automatic grenade launchers, 50 cal. So they tended to run away from us whenever, they got a heads up. And even in a primitive place like Helmand, everybody has cell phones. So there was an engagement while I was gone. I missed it, and I was pretty pissed about that when I got back. And I heard about it when I got back to our little patrol base. All our positions were named after South Park names. Ours was Casa Bonita. And that was, there was always something ahead of me, behind me, left or right. But I'd call it good luck, bad luck, grace, juju, whatever you want to call it. It just wasn't really kinetic wherever I was,
So I think it's worth mentioning, as you said, like something kinetic happened when you were gone. The reason why you're gone is very important. So we'll jump to that in just a moment. But I do want to anchor the point of how big a deal Marjah was for those who, aren't as closely aligned to the military who might be listening to this. Like that was a massive offensive in the time. Army, Marines, like full on, some brutal fighting. So I'm sure the Marines getting dropped in there were amped up to get into that fight, no doubt. And then something catastrophic happened. So why don't we talk about that, Beau, if you're okay with that?
Yeah. Weeks before the invasion, we were actually supposed to be the first platoon into Marjah, or one of the first platoons into Marjah. And my anti-armor team had been called up, and Lieutenant Barnes, our platoon commander, took one section up north to a company FOB where they had been taking contact just about every single day, Bravo Company, and FOB Spinning Guard. And we got briefed on what we were supposed to do the following day, that we were going to escort Bravo, and we were going to try and everything that was bleeding out of the city east, the effort was to push it back and hold it there until the invasion kicked off. And then in the middle, we were supposed to be up, long before dawn, and then every one of us woke to sunlight, like kind of confused. There was no reveille, so everyone was just kind of, what are we still doing here? And then eventually Lieutenant Barnes comes in and he gives us the word that the operation had been canked or canceled. And he said, we're going to go back. I forget how he worded it exactly. He was like, we got to go back to Geronimo. Battalion's got something for us. And this is a guy who gave like a 5-paragraph order for, like a security patrol, like a full-fledged, you always had the meat and potatoes of everything, very thorough. So all of us were like, okay, what just happened? We get to Geronimo, and I didn't take like, I didn't take my A point. I forgot it. And all I had was my Kevlar. And so I was like, all right, I didn't know we were going to the battalion FOB. Whenever you're away from the brass and the stars and stripes, you tend to get a little, anarchist, but whatever. Anyway, so like I've got this Mohawk, and I was like sitting in my truck, and I'm like praying that he doesn't need me for anything, or I don't have to get out of the vehicle, and I'm not going to get in trouble or whatever. And then he walks straight up to the front Vic, calls me out of the turret. It's like, I need your help with something. I'm like, you got to be shitting me. And so, but as we're walking, like I'm not thinking about that anymore, and I eventually kind of start getting paranoid. Like, why the hell is he calling me to go to the COC? I'm the Lance Corporal at the time at E3. And we start deviating away from the main door, the main entrance to the COC. And I was I didn't know where we were going. And all of a sudden the door came open. It was the battalion chaplain. And I walked in and I sat down and then got the word that Jeremy had been killed by a suicide bomber. Muhammad, whatever his first name is, al-Balawi. And as you very well know, one of the deadliest days in CIA history. And Jeremy was one of the 7 that was killed inside FOB Chapman in Khost province.
God, man. And just for those listening, Beau and I were speaking beforehand, and I don't share a ton of what I did at the agency because we're not allowed to. I joined after that event, but it was a ever-present feeling at the agency, constantly discussed, especially for CT work, that you have to listen to the experts. And a guy like Jeremy, who is in the teams and is an expert and says, we got to search somebody, you search them, there's no overriding that anymore. And there's a phenomenal book on how this goes down, Triple Agent. It's terrible to read through, but God, that's a seminal moment for the agency. They're a huge lesson learned. And Beau, I shared it with you, and I would share it here. I think that it wouldn't be unfair to say that, I'm safe today because that happened and people learned a hard lesson from it. So for whatever that's worth. So you're in the tent in RC South, basically. You get this news, and Ben is in country, is he not at the time?
Ben, not yet. His ODA is, his team is up north, and Ben was back home with my parents in Washington. And shortly, I get the news, and within a few hours, I'm on an Osprey headed for the air base in Kandahar, and CAF, I think was, and or whatever, Geronimo to Bastion to CAF. But once I get home and we have the memorial service for about 2 weeks, and then Ben and I leave about around 24, 48 hours apart and get back to our respective units. And so,
God, the book itself is great, and we don't need to dive into the memorial services, but it's pretty impressive the way you describe him, like the SEAL community that comes out. I mean, he's a contractor at the time working for the agency, but you still kind of have this brotherhood that comes and speaks about him, and it's like that alone is worth reading the book. But if I could ask, like, what is your mindset at that time after the memorial service? Like, how are you wrapping your head around going back into the fight, and how long is it until you get back in?
My mindset was not in a good place. And I know Ben struggled as well, but Ben came out of it by the end of the deployment. I think he had adjusted emotionally, spiritually, and in the way that one should. And I did not adjust very well. I almost got myself in trouble, and it probably would have been a whole lot worse if I didn't have guys looking out for me. And Johnson, Green, and Lolo were in the same truck, same fire team, and Lolo especially, just always kind of seemed to have one eye on me. Like, even if I was just on post, in the patrol base, just like, where's Wise? What's he doing? And not like he was like looking to get me in trouble. He was just trying to like protect me from myself, I think. And, it's a hell. I didn't do a great job adjusting. And knowing what I know now, I would try and do it a lot differently. But I was reckless, and I let my temper get the better of me a couple of times. And, one time specifically, I almost pulled the trigger when I shouldn't have. And something inside me knew, like this, it's sketchy, but he doesn't deserve to die. Thank God I was able to kind of hold myself. But then on the other hand was, I had this borderline agnostic, being raised religious, and I still am religious, but I was just kind of, ignoring my faith. Ben, on the other hand, was diving into it and reading his Bible every single day or every available opportunity, and, Bible studies and other things just to kind of keep himself, sharp and on an even keel. And, it's a hell of a thing to do, to deal with grief, but to do it in a stressful environment, it's not easy.
So if we could for a sec, Beau, what was it you would do differently, or was it the spiritual aspect that you would do differently? Because, the people who are going to deal with this in the future, who have just dealt with it, certainly not losing a brother, and let alone two, but losing somebody close to them in a combat environment. What are some of the lessons you've learned that you would pass on to someone else who is going through that?
Well, the spiritual dimension, yes. If the service member that we're talking to happens to be religious, then yes. But also, one of the things is, looking at every scenario subjectively. And Ben taught me that, time and time again, even when I didn't want to listen. When I saw this teenager that was spotting for a trigger man for an IED, I didn't want to think about the fact that he might have been coerced. Those were things that occurred to Ben, that he made sure that, he put in, he was thinking about the scenario, what the people in Balk or Farah or Hindu Kush, wherever he was, what they were going through, and, what might be behind why they're doing what they're doing. So approaching situations subjectively and having that kind of clarity in combat situations. And fortunately, I was lucky that I made it through 2 deployments without ever having to pull the trigger. And in Helmand, especially in 2009, 10, and 11.
Yeah.
I don't know. To this day, I don't know how that happened. And the guys in the second deployment where we were just wasn't that kinetic very much. But the first deployment it just wasn't for me. And even in my own platoon, it was kind of a joke. Like I would get put on patrols that were going west. I would go to a different squad so that I could go west towards Marjah and go get some. And it wouldn't happen. And then my old squad would take contact back right outside the patrol base. I'm like, what the hell, man? And it's just the way it worked out,
Gosh. In the book, you talk about the reception you got when you came back. Same with Ben, it blew my mind, Beau, because I cannot imagine having somebody else come back. And it seemed like people were irritated that you got time off, but it was to go and bury your brother, right? I don't know if you could just talk about that for a minute. To me, it was incredible that people would treat you that way.
Yeah, it's, you're not going to think clearly, I guess, on, a deployment. Maybe back in the States, you might think that that's judgmental of those guys. If the roles were reversed, I might have been the same way, I suppose. The first time I left, and we left with, the assumption that Jeremy was going to be buried at Arlington. And then as we kind of learned out, the restrictions or the requirements of what it, takes to be buried at Arlington, we realized this was going to be a long fight. And eventually we just gave up. And so between the memorial service, between the time that Jeremy passed and the time that we actually did bury him, being months apart, when I left for the second time, that's when I got the biggest judgment. And I almost didn't go. And then I had conflicting, opinions. I asked both my platoon sergeant and platoon commander. And my platoon commander was like, if I didn't go home and bury my brother, I think I'd regret it. And I was like, all right, I'm going. So when I went, and then I buried him, came back, and then there was a little bit of a cold shoulder from a few of the guys. And I didn't argue with it. I kind of felt like I understood it because part of me felt guilty for going. And, and I know it sounds weird, but I was scared that something was going to happen while I was gone. And I dealt with that fear the first go around, and I was dealing with the second go around. And, what if that was one of the things I thought about, like, what if somebody's, I didn't get the opportunity to say goodbye to Jeremy. What if one of my Marines is gone, and I never had the opportunity to say goodbye or be there for him or prevent it from happening? You know what I mean? So, like, and I don't know, we got over it because nothing happened. I still think about that quite a bit, actually.
Man. Okay. So, so you're back. If we could jump into this experience that you have with Lolo, and you touched on it, I think you were alluding to that just a minute ago, but, with an IED in the road, could you just talk about that experience that you had?
Yeah. So I think, it was probably the wee hours in the morning when I spotted this guy. We're the picket line for the Marjah invasion. The road is Route Olympia, I believe is the name of it. And it goes straight into this major intersection on the east side of Marjah called 5 Points. And we're monitoring this road. The invasion, the main effort is going to be moving towards us west to east, or at least one element of it was, and we were supposed to catch what got flushed out, basically. And so we're lined up, and it's my shift. I'm in the turret. I've been there hours, and I don't know how long. And I have these optics called vectors, and which can mark the range. The binoculars, they have a rangefinder, and I see these guys digging in the middle of the road at night. Now there's poppy farms, poppy fields, both on the south and north side. On the north side is the Wadi, the irrigation system, and then a field on the side of that. So anyway, I see this guy digging in the road. You can't shoot him just because he's got a shovel. He could be a farmer that's trying to access water from the Wadi into his poppy field. You never know. So you kind of have to see. So we call it in, and I'm like, he's digging in one spot, not digging across the road. And every alarm, like my spidey senses are tingling, and I'm just kind of, call it up, and I want to kill this guy. And I'm denied, not because he might have been sketchy. I think they, battalion sent a sniper to go put eyes on him. And, but because unbeknownst to me, there was Marines beyond my line of fire, that were holding in place, which is where it was Cop Riley was supposed to be built. And so even though I couldn't see them, they were out there, and the only weapon that I could reach them with is a 50, which is a pretty long max effective range, and you don't want to take any chance with that. So I was denied. Next morning, combat engineers are rolling through. I give them a heads up, like I saw a guy digging, I marked the range, here it is. And I was like, get out, sweep, don't stop until you get to 5 Points. They did everything I told them to, except they got back in the vehicles early, and then they rolled right over the top of it. And I kind of lost my mind. During all of this, a kid gets shot through the chest, who was the spotter for the IED. And I observed it with pleasure. The first to admit it. I'm not proud of that looking back, but I was as honest as I could be with Tom in the writing process of this book. And my poor response to grief, I think, can serve as an example of what not to do. This contrast, between that example and between the way Ben responded, I thought it was very important for me to be as honest as I could be so that people could see that contrast. And you can see an example of somebody who embodies the warrior ethos like Ben, and even in the face of grief, and still just keep pushing and try and keep your soul in check. And the way that I did it. And so, yeah, that's pretty much it in a nutshell.
God. Well, I don't know how most people would handle that anyway. I think Ben was kind of a superhuman to begin with, but I don't think many people could fault you for feeling that way. So, I wonder if we could jump to, and just for those who haven't read the book, the the amount of research that went into this, I mean, I can't even begin to imagine having to track down the teammates of a SEAL and a Green Beret who were probably scattered to the winds on deployments, quite honestly. But you do such a great job in that of bringing out the experiences that they felt in combat. And again, those stories alone are worth this book. But I wonder, though, Beau, if you could tell a story that comes to mind about Jeremy's combat experience, and then we could do one for Ben.
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me just say all I did was kind of network for Tom, my co-author, Tom Saleo, and just kind of connect him to the right people. And, we new SEALs, the guys that I hadn't even met before, and I lived with Jeremy in Virginia Beach. And so once Tom, got connected to the right people, and, once we were in takeoff mode, everything just kind of, and that's, I got the right guy to help me do this project. He's been absolutely amazing. But you hit the nail on the head. Starting off with deployments, that was huge. A lot of the guys, especially the SEALs, were downrange. It kind of shocked me because coincidentally, Green Berets have a very kinetic, pretty heavy deployment cycle. 90% of the guys that we wanted to talk to were home on Ben's side. And so we were able to access information a lot easier on that. But I'm not sure if I should say some of the names of the team guys, but they were off in another country doing what they do. And some of them, anyone that could helped. And we had guys that were reaching us from thousands of miles away that just wanted to help out and share what they could to put as much of the Jeremy and chapters together and the Ben chapters together. So, and the Marines, I have a 20-member text chain from the guys at Cat 2 that, helped me and supported me during this project. And a lot of fact checking because there's some things that you neglect, especially when you're looking back through, 10 years of trauma, like things that I completely erased from my memory. There were even good memories. And I was like, man, how did I forget that? And so those, big shout out to everybody in Cat 2 that's been helping me out, like, fact checking me, make sure that I had everything, remembered everything correctly, because especially traumatic memories tend to be like jigsaw puzzles that could just get tumped upside down. So it's great having that brotherhood and that network to help you piece it back together. And I'm fortunate enough to say that I have 3 amazing brotherhoods that have been supportive of this project.
And then, so which of those stories comes to life for you for Jeremy, I guess, Beau?
So there was one that the only one that I know of that was present for this was not around. He was downrange while we were riding it. So, and we had so much between Jeremy and Ben. We had enough cool stuff. But there was one that I always really liked, training and combat. The training one, he's in intel school, and he's in pre-buds or whatever it's called, and they're doing leg levers, flutter kicks, hello dollies, and all the sexy 6-pack stuff that you do, to walk around in a swimsuit and buds. And anyway, there's this guy next to him, an officer, and he's they're having to maintain 6 inches off the deck, keep your heels off the deck, 6 inches. And the guy's hurting, and Jeremy knows it. And he knows that the whole squad's about to get punished if his heels touch the deck. And right before his heels hit the deck, he feels something underneath his feet lifting him up. And Jeremy had lifted his leg underneath him and picked him up and was holding him. He just reaches over and smiles. He's like, I got you, brother. And so he's in Iraq, and he runs out the back of the Chinook, and they're heading for this target building, I believe in search of some HVIs. And then he looks up on the roof, and there's this guy with an RPG, and he just real quick thinking, he just reaches up and fires a hammered pair, and the guy, darts or jumps away or whatever, and he thinks that he missed. And after they take the building, one of the guys, I think the chief, comes up to him and says, "Hey, did you fire a hammered pair at a RPG gunner on the rooftop?" And he said, "Yeah." He takes him over and he shows him this guy that was on the ground that had 2 shots, like a hammered bear that was so tight running that it snapped his forearm in half. But one of the, I was like, that's the tightest group running I think you can achieve. So it's a pretty cool story, but he missed the fatal shot, but hey, you can't fire an RPG anymore, at least not right-handed. So.
Yeah, especially with the Chinook sitting there and guys coming off of it. I mean, what a shot. Jeez.
Yeah.
All right. If we could jump to a story that you remember from Ben, and there are many in the book that you share, like, yeah, that guy was in some serious fights. And I will say there's a picture in the book of him in all of his gear. He's got his glove on. He's like in country. He just looks like a badass, like in his element. I think he's a medic, right? Who's got these sniper skills, but he just looks like a door kicker. It's a cool shot. Anyway, what comes to mind for Ben?
This one I got via email from Ben. He got a guy, it wasn't, it was within 100 meters. It wasn't a great range, but it was with the SCAR Heavy or the SCAR 308 or 7.62, the NATO round. And he saw the guy running through a window and knew that he would, as the guy on the inside of a compound ran past a window, he realized that he'd be running through a door. And he saw the exposed door and drew on it and waited and dropped him as he passed the door and got him in the head about 40, 50 meters. And that was something that I got from wherever he was, from Balk to Helmand Province. And I was like, I wrote him back, and I didn't give him props a whole lot because we're brothers, but I was like, holy shit, dude, that's a hell of a shot for a heavy.
That's great. If you can think back to some of his ODA teammates that you interviewed or that Tom interviewed and you talked to, how did they tend to describe him on deployments? What was he like in a fight?
Goofy. So some of the ODA guys were playing a game. They if it became, we haven't, I don't know if it's going to be a movie or not, but they're playing like this game of who would portray Ben, and three of them have said unanimously it must be Chris Pratt. So if that gives you any idea to how goofy Ben's personality actually was. And he one of his teammates, Clay, is, you might want to edit this out later. I'll let you decide. But one of his teammates, Clay, was Asian, and Ben would get on the PA at this FOB where they were at, and he would go, Craig, you got a phone call, Craig. and if Clay would get mad at him, he would say, why you not rubbing me, Craig?
Oh man.
And Ben, he would get, he'd be very, 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 very subtle, and then he would just like do something that was just way out of left field. But everybody wants to go to war with a funny guy, you know what I mean? And there's no hard feelings in Iraq or Afghanistan. You know how it is. And,
yeah. So, Beau, that sounds a little different than the way you described him growing up, though. Like this kind of, I'm not sure if you call him an introvert, so I don't want to put that word out there, but
he was
a little more reserved,
Yeah, he was, but he has his moment. I mean, they're much more rare with Ben than they are with Jeremy, but it's because of that reason that it just everybody loses it when Ben makes it, because nobody sees it coming. But he had his goofy side, but you're right. It wasn't really very stereotypical of him early on. Maybe just being around brothers all the time just kind of brings it out of him. When he's comfortable, but he has to be comfortable.
God. So I'm going to avoid having you tell the story about when Ben is taken, but I strongly recommend people read this in the book. I mean, it is kind of somebody taking it to the last moment and like incredibly selfless. But just so that I don't end up crying, I'm going to bypass that one. But I do want to ask, Beau, if you can, after that happens, how are you told that this has happened and what happens next?
Uh, so after we said goodbye, and I sent the family home. We're in Landstuhl, Germany, at the hospital. We send the family home from Fisher House. They fly back to the States, and myself and a fellow Green Beret, eventually two, stay behind for guardian angel and post-mortem autopsy and all of that. And I was, all totaled, I was in Germany for about 2 weeks. And once I get back, we get to Dover, we're at the Air Force Base and it's Fisher House in Dover, and found out, Commandant's on his way. And never met the Commandant before, and this was, a hell of a first meeting. But he came, long story short, he came and he got down on me and he talked to my parents and he said, he's not going anywhere for a long, long time. So immediately it was ultimate devastation. Like, I felt like I had not just lost my brothers, now I had officially lost everything. I thought immediately that meant that I was going to be kicked out of active duty. Fortunately, it didn't. I was allowed to stay. I just wasn't allowed to deploy. So I'm glad I wasn't kicked out of active duty, because I moving on, until I got to a point where I could communicate with my wife again, with my family. The only really Marines or Green Berets or SEALs were kind of the only people that I could talk to. So, but initially it was pretty devastating in just about every way.
So this is the Commandant, like the number one Marine, telling your folks, Beau's never going to get harmed. I'm not going to let it happen, basically. So, Beau, just in the interest of time here, I want to get you back to your day. There are a few things I like to ask everybody, and there are two questions in particular. And if you can, I would love to hear the answer for yourself and what you think Ben and Jeremy would have answered in this case, if you're comfortable doing so. So, first one is, was there anything that you carried with you in combat that had sentimental value or good luck?
It was this personalized dog tag from my dad, and it was, I still got it, and I lost it for a while, and a week after my dad passed, he suffered from Parkinson's, and when he passed years ago, I was like cleaning the garage, like organizing just for no reason, and I like chuck a box, against the wall, like stacking boxes. This dog tag falls out of a box, and I've kept it, pretty close ever since. But I kept Jeremy's shooter ID, Delta 46, on me through the deployments, and then when I got home, I got it tattooed on me, and then I got his. Yeah, so I keep their call signs pretty close. Those are the call signs that they were wearing when they were the last call signs in the SEAL teams and Ben's ODA.
Do you know, well, actually, on the dog tag, when did your dad give that to you, and what was the significance at the time?
He gave it to me when I left in 2009, and between my enlistment in 2008 and when I settled into K-Bay, he let his pride shine through. He was proud. He was always proud, and same with my mom. But they had, like, okay, we're not talking him into college. It's not going to happen. That's when they, like, well, we've got to deal with it now. And he was very, very proud, and he talked about us all the time. And it was like, and I've got it in a box, not a moving box, but I've got it in a little treasure chest. And it just said, my heart's with you, and something to that effect. And
damn,
it had a date on it, and I think I got it when I was in Afghanistan. I got my we were, a lot of people talk about getting mail like once a month. They're lucky. We didn't get mail. The PX train, the first time the PX train came was way after the Marjah invasion. And one of my buddies, indeed, with a pop-up flare, and the PX Marines just about shit their pants. It's like, it's not that bad out here. But anyway, when I finally got my mail, that was in it. And yeah.
Oh, wow. And then what about, do you know for Ben or Jeremy if they carried anything with them?
Ben carried a Bible, and it was and the Bible that was used by Ben and a fellow Green Beret, Kevin Fleich. And you read the book, and just so you know, Kevin is doing phenomenally at Harvard Law. I think he's actually graduated now, and he is. If had it not been for COVID, I think he would have run Boston Marathon. I mean, he's running. I mean, he has made a strong recovery, and he has bounced back. And anyway, the Bible that Kevin and Ben recited St. Michael's prayer and said their prayers before they went off, on ops, is actually buried with them. Jeremy, I don't know if he carried any kind of tokens or anything like that, but I would imagine it was probably a picture of Dana and Ethan, if anything else.
Yeah.
And, the heart and soul of Jeremy and Ben is the family. And I've tried to kind of live in that example as best I can.
And then the last question I like to ask everyone, Beau, is, and I'm always curious how people will answer this, and never more so than right now. So what I like to ask is, after everything you've been through, the heartache, the deployments, the loss that you've had in particular, and then how you dealt with it afterwards, which is incredible as you describe it in the book. Would you do it all again?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I really think that Jeremy and Ben would do the same thing. And, I mean, in Virginia Beach, after we buried Jeremy, I was approached by one of your counterparts, worked with Central Intelligence Agency, that said, I wouldn't be here if it weren't for Jeremy. And since then, I've talked to Green Berets, SEALs, soldiers, that said, I wouldn't be here if it weren't for Jeremy, wouldn't be here if it weren't for Ben. I mean, we're coming up on 12 years, and I keep hearing that. And so, I think Tom did as good a job as can be done as far as focusing on Jeremy and Ben's effort for the preservation of life, not just, we talk about pulling the trigger, and being door kickers, and that's awesome, being prepared to do it when it's necessary and not being, not hesitating. But the reason that you don't hesitate is, to protect, the guys left and right. And the end status is preservation, and they were most certainly masters of the craft.
So I want to round this out. The book, again, like, I can't say enough about it. It's really well written. And actually, Beau, there's somebody who reached out to me and said, this book is incredible. You got to try to reach out to Beau and see if you can interview him. So I know there are a lot of people out there interested in this. I might just ask, what is going on now for you? Obviously, making sure people get a hold of the book. Is there anything else you're working on right now?
No, writing, no. There is a lot of questions that I have. I don't have any answers to those questions as of yet. If I did, maybe that'd be something I might talk to Tom about in the future. But he's doing some amazing work right now, and I don't want to. If you want to interview Tom in the future, I'll let you two talk about it. But he's got some pretty awesome things on his plate, and I'm looking forward to seeing those published. But no, nothing on the works except just looking forward to preschool and daycare all that cool stuff, the quiet life and small business, small town.
I hear you. So thanks so much for the time, Beau. This has been great. Thank you for putting the book together and sharing it the way you did with Tom and the partnership there. It means a lot, and God, it hit me hard when I read it, so I'm sure it will for other people. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing it, Ryan, and thank you for having me, brother. It's been an honor.